Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step carefully into a place where the streets feel narrower than they should, where the air hangs heavy with damp brick coal smoke and something harder to name, something that clings quietly to your clothes. You move forward slowly, your shoes meeting uneven ground that shifts between mud and packed refuse. And already you sense that this is not a place designed for comfort. It is a place designed for endurance. You glance around, taking in the walls rising close on either side. Windows open, but offering no breeze. Only the layered sounds of voices, coughing laughter, and arguments blending together. And somewhere in the back of your mind there is a small, honest thought. You probably will not survive this for long. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are here, let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights. You take another step forward and the street seems to fold in around you as if it has been waiting for your arrival without actually welcoming it. There is no clear boundary marking where the city ends and this district begins, yet the difference is immediate. The buildings lean slightly inward, their surfaces worn and stained, their bricks darkened by years of soot and weather. Laundry hangs above you, stretched from window to window like fragile banners moving only slightly in the thick air. A cart rolls past its wooden wheels, grinding against stone. The man pulling it does not look up. His focus is fixed ahead, as though stopping for even a moment might cost him something he cannot afford to lose. Around him, others move in similar rhythms, quick, purposeful, and inwardly focused. You notice how few people linger without reason. A widely accepted detail about these neighborhoods is that by the mid-19th century, certain districts of New York, especially areas like the 5 Points, had become some of the most densely populated places in the world. Entire families, sometimes multiple families, were packed into buildings never intended to hold so many lives. You do not need a statistic to understand it, though. You can feel it in the way the street breathes, or rather struggles to. You pause for a moment, letting your senses adjust. The sounds come first. A child calling out from somewhere above, a door slamming, a distant burst of laughter that fades quickly into silence. There is music too faint and uneven, perhaps from a violin played in a nearby room. It does not carry far, but it adds a strange softness to the edge of everything else. The smell follows. It is layered complex. Cooked food, though simple and stretched thin. Coal smoke drifting from chimneys, damp wood, waste that has nowhere proper to go. It is not overwhelming all at once, but it builds steadily, settling into your awareness. You continue walking your shoulder, brushing briefly against the wall. The surface is cold and slightly slick, as if it never fully dries. You pull your hand back instinctively, wiping it against your coat without thinking. Small gestures like this begin to matter here. You start to understand that even the simplest contact with your surroundings carries weight. A group of children darts past you, their movements sudden and fluid. They weave through the narrow space with ease, laughing, calling to one another in quick bursts of sound. One of them glances at you briefly, curiosity flickering across their face before they disappear around a corner. Their clothes are worn, patched in places, but their energy feels almost out of place against the heaviness of the street. There is a lesser-known observation from accounts of the time that many children in these districts developed an almost instinctive awareness of their environment at a very young age. They learned where to step, when to move, who to avoid, and how to navigate spaces that would confuse or overwhelm an outsider. Watching them now, you can see it clearly. They belong to this place in a way you do not. You slow your pace again, not because you're tired, but because moving too quickly feels like a mistake. The street does not open itself easily. It reveals only what you take the time to notice. Ahead, a doorway stands slightly ajar. Inside, you catch a glimpse of darkness, broken only by a faint flicker of light deeper within. Someone passes through it, slipping inside without hesitation, and the door settles back into place. You find yourself wondering how many people share that space, how many stories are layered within those walls. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about whether the people living in these neighbourhoods fully understood the long-term health consequences of their surroundings, or whether survival simply took precedence over any distant concern. Standing here, the question feels almost misplaced. When each day demands your full attention, when every choice is immediate and necessary, the future becomes something abstract, something you might not have the luxury to consider. A woman passes you carrying a bundle held close to her chest. Her steps are steady, her expression focused. She does not look at you, and you sense that she has learned not to. Attention can invite trouble here. It is safer to move with purpose, to become part of the constant flow, rather than stand apart from it. You hear a voice calling from above, sharp and urgent. Another voice answers equally strong. The words themselves are lost in the noise, but the tone carries clearly. Life here is not quiet, not in the way you might expect. Even silence feels temporary, like something that could break at any moment. You take a deeper breath, testing the air again. It feels heavier now, or perhaps you are simply more aware of it. Your chest rises and falls, adjusting slowly. You realize that your body is already beginning to adapt even in these first few minutes. Small changes, subtle shifts. The street bends slightly ahead and you follow it without thinking. There is no clear destination guiding you, only the sense that moving forward is the only option. Behind you, the path already feels less certain, as though it has folded back into itself. A man leans against the wall nearby, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. He watches the movement of the street with quiet attention, noticing details you might miss. When your gaze meets his for a brief moment, there is no hostility but no welcome either. Just acknowledgement. You look away first. There is something about this place that resists easy understanding. It is not simply hardship, though, that is everywhere. It is not only danger, though you can feel that too. It is a kind of constant negotiation between survival and adaptation, between what must be endured and what can be shaped even slightly into something livable. You take another step, then another, letting the rhythm of the street begin to guide you. The sounds, the movement, the closeness of everything around you start to feel less overwhelming, though not entirely familiar. You're still an outsider here. That much is clear. But for now you are here, and the street continues to unfold in front of you, one careful step at a time. You move closer to one of the buildings, drawn almost without thinking toward the doorway you noticed earlier. Up close it looks even smaller than it first appeared, the wood worn smooth in places where countless hands have pushed it open. You hesitate for a brief moment, listening. Inside the sounds are quieter but more concentrated. A low murmur of voice for mouths, a cough that lingers too long, the faint scrape of something being moved across a floor. You step in, the light changes immediately. Outside, even the dim street offered a sense of space, but here the air feels enclosed, pressed into corners that do not quite release it. The hallway stretches ahead, narrow and dim, lit only by a weak glow filtering down from somewhere above. The walls are close enough that your shoulders nearly brush both sides at once. You take a careful breath. It carries the scent of cooking, but also something heavier. Damp cloth, old wood, a trace of smoke that never quite leaves. The floor beneath your feet creaks slightly each step, announcing itself whether you intend it to or not. You instinctively soften your pace, though it makes little difference. A commonly noted reality of these tenement buildings is that many were constructed quickly and cheaply to meet the growing demand for housing, especially as waves of immigrants arrived in the city throughout the 19th century. Ventilation was minimal, light was limited, privacy almost non-existent. Standing here, you do not need a written record to understand that. The space tells you everything. A door to your left stands open just enough for you to glimpse inside. You do not mean to look, but your eyes are drawn to the movement. A small room, barely larger than a modern storage space, holds several figures. A woman bends over a basin, her hands moving steadily through water that has long since lost any hint of freshness. A child sits nearby, watching quietly, their back resting against the wall. In the corner store, another figure lies still wrapped in blankets. No one speaks. The quiet is not peaceful, it is simply necessary. You step forward again, continuing down the hallway. The air grows warmer as you move deeper inside, not in a comforting way. It feels used, as if it has already passed through too many lungs before reaching yours. You notice how your breathing changes, becoming slower, more deliberate, as if your body is trying to make the most of each inhale. From above you hear footsteps, slow, uneven, moving across what must be the floor overhead. The sound carries clearly through the structure as though the building itself cannot hold it back. Voices follow, faint but present, blending into a steady background hum. There is an interesting detail often mentioned in personal accounts from this period. Some residents describe being able to recognize their neighbors not by sight but by sound. The pattern of footsteps, the rhythm of a cough, the way a chair scraped across the floor. In a place where walls offered little separation, sound became a kind of identity. You reach a staircase, its wooden steps worn down at the centre from years of use. You place your foot carefully on the first step, testing its stability before shifting your weight. It holds, though it gives slightly beneath you. Each step upward brings a faint echo, a hollow sound that seems to travel through the building. Halfway up, you pass someone descending. They move quickly, their shoulder brushing yours without apology. It is not rudeness, it is efficiency. There is no room here for hesitation, no space to step aside without disrupting the flow. At the top of the stairs, the hallway continues, though it feels even narrower now. A small window at the far end offers a weak rectangle of light, but it does little to illuminate the space between. Doors line both sides, some closed, others slightly open, each one holding a separate world compressed into a few square feet. You pause near one of them, drawn again by the sound inside. A soft voice speaking, then another responding. There is a rhythm to it, a quiet exchange that feels almost intimate despite the lack of privacy. You cannot make out the words, but the tone carries a sense of familiarity, perhaps even comfort. Then a cough interrupts. It is sharp, sudden, and it lingers. You hear it again, deeper this time, followed by a pause that stretches just a little too long. You find yourself holding your breath without realizing it, as if distance alone might offer protection. There is a long-standing debate among scholars about how much of the disease that spread through these tenements was directly caused by the environment itself, and how much was influenced by broader factors like poverty, nutrition, and limited medical knowledge. But standing here hearing that cough echo through thin walls, it feels less like an abstract question and more like an unavoidable presence. You move on. Further down the hall, a door opens suddenly and a burst of brighter light spills into the corridor. Inside, you catch a glimpse of a small flame, perhaps a lamp or a cooking fire, casting warm shadows across the room. For a moment, the space looks almost inviting. Then the door closes again and the hallway returns to its dim, steady state. You continue walking, your hand brushing lightly against the wall to guide yourself. The surface is rough in places, smoother in others, worn down by constant contact. You imagine how many people have done the same tracing this path day after day, year after year. A child's voice echoes from behind one of the doors, followed by laughter that rises quickly and fades just as fast. It surprises you, the lightness of it. Even here, especially here, moments of ease find their way through. There is a lesser discussed observation that despite the harsh conditions, many residents formed close-knit communities within these buildings. They shared food when they could watch over one another's children and created small networks of support that made daily life slightly more manageable. It was not always consistent, not always reliable, but it existed. You reach the end of the hallway and stop near the small window. The glass is cloudy, its surface marked by streaks and dust, but it allows just enough light to soften the edges of the space. You look out, expecting a clear view of the street, but instead you see another wall just a few feet away. Another building just as close, just as crowded. You rest your hand on the window frame, feeling the coolness of the wood beneath your fingers. For a moment you stay still, letting the sounds of the building settle around you. The footsteps, the voices, the quiet movements behind closed doors. This is how life unfolds here, not in open spaces but in layers. One room pressed against another, one breath following the next, each moment shaped by the presence of others. You take a slow breath, then turn back toward the stairs. The building does not hold you, it simply contains you for as long as you remain inside. And as you begin your descent, the sounds shift again, guiding you back toward the street where the air, though no cleaner, at least feels wider. You step back out into the street, and for a moment the open air feels almost generous, even though it carries the same weight you noticed before. The space seems wider now after the narrow hallway, though nothing has truly changed. The buildings still press inward. The sky above is still only a thin strip between rooftops, but your lungs expand a little more easily, and that alone feels like a small relief. You move forward again, letting your pace settle into something steady. The ground beneath your feet shifts with each step, not solid in the way you expect from a city street. It is uneven, softened by layers of mud ash and things best left unnamed. You watch where you place your feet, adjusting instinctively, learning quickly that a careless step here can mean more than just discomfort. Ahead, a small crowd gathers around a water pump. You approach, slowly drawn by the sound of metal against metal. The pump handle rises and falls in a steady rhythm, each motion followed by the splash of water hitting a waiting bucket. People stand close together, their containers lined up in a loose order that seems understood without being spoken. A broadly recognized detail about life in these neighborhoods is that access to clean water was limited and often shared among many households. Public pumps like this one became essential points of daily life. They were not just places to collect water, but places where time was spent, where people waited, talked, argued, and watched one another. You stop a short distance away observing. A woman grips the handle, her movements controlled but firm. Each push takes effort. You can see it in the tension of her arms, the way she leans slightly into the motion. The water that emerges is not perfectly clear, but it is enough. It has to be. Beside her, a man waits with a bucket at his feet. He shifts his weight from one foot to the other, glancing occasionally at the line behind him. No one speaks loudly, but there is a quiet awareness of time. Everyone here has somewhere else to be, something else that cannot wait too long. You notice how close they stand to one another. There is no space for distance, no room for hesitation. When the woman finishes, she steps aside and the man moves forward immediately, taking her place without a word. The rhythm continues unbroken. A child crouches nearby, trailing their fingers through a shallow puddle formed by spilled water. The surface ripples gently with each movement. The child seems absorbed in it, unaware or unconcerned with the conditions around them. For a moment it feels like a simple scene. Then you notice the colour of the water, the way it carries traces of the street with it. You shift your gaze. A lesser known but frequently mentioned concern from the time is that many of these water sources were easily contaminated, especially in areas where waste disposal systems were poorly managed or entirely absent. It was not always obvious. The water might look acceptable, might even taste fine at first, but it carried risks that were not fully understood. You watch as the man lifts his bucket, careful not to spill more than necessary. He steps away, moving through the crowd with practiced ease. Others follow, each taking their turn, each repeating the same sequence of motion. You continue walking, leaving the pump behind, but its presence lingers in your thoughts. Water, something so simple, so taken for granted elsewhere, feels different here. It is not just a resource, it is a daily effort. The street narrows slightly as you move on and the ground becomes more difficult to navigate. A thin channel runs along the side, carrying a slow stream of liquid that reflects the dim light in uneven patches. You step carefully to avoid it though. In places it is impossible to completely keep your distance. The smell here is sharper. You notice it more clearly now, perhaps because you have begun to distinguish its layers. There is the familiar scent of coal smoke, but beneath it something sour, something that lingers at the back of your throat. You breathe through your mouth for a moment, then return to slower, measured breaths through your nose, adjusting again. A cart passes you, its wheels cutting through the soft ground. The man guiding it calls out briefly a warning more than a greeting, and you step aside just in time. The cart carries barrels, their contents unknown, though the faint odour suggests it is not something you would want to examine too closely. You continue forward. From a nearby doorway, a voice calls out, offering something for sale. The words are quick practice, repeated again and again with slight variations. You catch fragments. Bread, soup, cheap but filling. The voice carries a note of urgency, but also familiarity. This is routine. A widely accepted observation among historians is that informal street economies played a crucial role in these districts. People sold what they could when they could, often operating on the thinnest margins. Food especially was both essential and uncertain. What was available one day might not be the next. You glance toward the doorway but do not step inside. Instead you keep moving, letting the sounds blend into the background. Further ahead you see another cluster of activity. This time it is not organised like the water pump, it is looser, more chaotic. A group of people stands around a pile of refuse, sorting through it with careful attention. Their movements are deliberate, searching for anything of value. A scrap of metal, a piece of cloth, something that can be reused, repurposed or sold. You slow your pace. There is no shame in their actions, only focus. Each person works within their own small space, aware of the others, but not interfering unless necessary. It is a quiet negotiation, a balance maintained without formal rules. A curious detail noted in some personal writings from the period is that nothing in these neighbourhoods truly went to waste. Items passed through many hands, serving multiple purposes before finally being discarded. Even then, they might be examined again, just in case something had been missed. You watch for a moment longer, then continue on. The street bends again, and as you follow it, you begin to notice how the light changes. It does not brighten exactly, but it shifts, reflecting off surfaces in different ways. A window catches a faint glimmer. A puddle reflects a distorted image of the sky. You pause briefly, looking down at your reflection. It is unclear, broken by movement, but it is enough to remind you that you are still here, still moving through this place that feels both constant and ever-changing. There is a lingering question that scholars continue to explore. To what extent did people adapt to these conditions, and to what extent did they resist them even in small, quiet ways? It is not an easy question to answer. Adaptation and resistance often look the same from a distance. You lift your gaze again. The street stretches ahead, carrying on with its steady rhythm. People move, voices rise and fall, the pump, the doorway, the cart, the small exchanges that fill each moment. Nothing here stops. And as you take another step forward, you begin to understand that survival in this place is not defined by any single action, but by the accumulation of many small ones repeated again and again, day after day. You continue along the narrow street, and gradually, almost without noticing, the pace of movement around you begins to shift. The adults remain focused, purposeful, moving, with that same steady urgency you have already come to recognize. But the children move differently. They dart, they pause, they disappear and reappear as if the street itself is a kind of game board known only to them. A group gathers near a broken section of wall, where bricks have crumbled just enough to form a shallow recess. It is not a space designed for play, but it has become one anyway. You slow your steps, watching from a distance that feels respectful without drawing too much attention. One child balances on a narrow ledge, arms stretched out slightly for stability, their feet finding small points of contact with practiced ease. Another crouches below, tracing shapes in the dust with a piece of charcoal. A third keeps watch, not in a formal sense, but with an awareness that seems instinctive. Their eyes move often, scanning the street, noting who passes and who lingers. There is an established historical understanding that in many 19th century slum districts, children began contributing to household survival at a very young age. Some sold newspapers, others ran errands, scavenged materials, or assisted in small trades. Formal schooling, when it existed, was often irregular and secondary to immediate needs. Watching these children now, you can see how quickly awareness must develop. One of them notices you. It is only a brief glance, a flicker of curiosity, but it is enough. For a moment the movement slows, then just as quickly it resumes. You're acknowledged, then absorbed into the background like everything else. You take another step forward. A small object rolls across your path, stopping near your foot. A makeshift toy, perhaps crafted from scraps of wood and tied together with string. You bend slightly, examining it without picking it up. It carries the marks of use worn smooth in places where hands have held it again and again. From behind you a voice calls out sharp but not unkind. A child runs past, scooping up the object without breaking stride. They glance back briefly, offering a quick grin, before vanishing into a side alley. You straighten, watching the space where they disappeared. There is something striking in how play exists here. It does not require open fields or carefully made toys. It forms out of whatever is available, adapting to the environment rather than waiting for it to improve. You move closer to the alley. Inside, the space narrows further, the light dimming as the walls rise higher on either side. A few children linger here, their voices lower, their movements more contained. One leans against the wall, arms crossed, watching the others with a seriousness that feels older than their years. A less frequently highlighted detail in contemporary observations is that children in these districts often developed complex social structures among themselves. Roles formed naturally: leaders, followers, watchers, negotiators. These roles could shift quickly, but they were understood without needing explanation. You notice how they interact. A small disagreement breaks out over something you cannot quite see. Voices rise, gestures sharpen. For a moment it feels like it might escalate. Then just as suddenly it resolves. A shrug, a nod. Movement continues. The conflict dissolves back into the rhythm of the group. You step back slightly, giving them space. From above, a window opens with a sudden creak. A woman leans out, her voice cutting through the air as she calls down. The children react immediately. Some scatter, others respond with quick words, their tones shifting from playful to attentive. The moment changes. You realize how closely their movements are tied to the adults around them, even when they seem independent. Freedom here is not absolute. It exists within boundaries that are constantly reinforced. You continue walking, leaving the alley behind. The street opens slightly, though not by much. A cart stands nearby, its contents spread out across a rough surface. Small items, buttons, scraps of fabric, bits of metal. A child stands beside it, calling out softly to passing adults, offering each piece with a seriousness that feels practiced. There is a widely accepted recognition among historians that many children became part of informal street economies, learning to negotiate, sell and manage small exchanges from an early age. It was not simply about earning money. It was about understanding value in a place where resources were always limited. You pause near the cart. The child looks up at you, eyes steady, waiting. There is no hesitation, no shyness, only expectation. You sense that they have done this many times before, that each interaction is part of a larger pattern. You offer a small nod, then step away. The exchange does not need to happen for it to feel complete. Further along, you hear laughter again, louder this time. A group of children runs past, their energy spilling into the street, weaving between adults who barely react. It is as if this movement has become part of the environment, something expected, something accounted for without conscious thought. A curious anecdote appears in some personal accounts from the period. Observers noted that despite the harsh conditions, children often displayed remarkable resilience and adaptability, finding ways to create moments of joy even in the most constrained environments. Watching them now, you understand how that might be possible. You slow your pace once more. The sounds of the street settle around you again, but now they carry a different tone. Beneath the weight of labour, of necessity, of constant negotiation, there is something lighter threading through it. Not dominant, not overwhelming, but present. You glance back, briefly catching a final glimpse of the children as they disappear around another corner. Their world is shaped by this place, but is not entirely defined by it. And as you turn forward again, continuing your walk, you carry that realization with you. That even here, especially here, life does not move in a single direction. It bends, it adapts, It finds small spaces to exist beyond expectation. The street continues ahead, waiting quietly for your next step. You keep moving, and almost without warning, the light begins to change again. It is subtle. Subtle at first. The sky above dims slightly, not because the sun has fully set, but because the buildings seem to swallow what little light remains. Shadows stretch longer across the street, soft at the edges, but deepening toward the centre. The sounds shift too. The steady rhythm of daytime activity loosens, replaced by something less predictable. You notice it in the way people move. Steps become quicker. Conversations shorten. Doors close more often than they open. You slow down, adjusting to the change without fully understanding it yet. A commonly accepted observation in historical records is that nighttime in 19th century urban slums often brought a noticeable increase in petty crime. Limited lighting, crowded conditions, and economic desperation created opportunities that did not exist so easily during the day. You do not need a written account to feel that shift. It is already happening around you. A man passes you, his hat pulled low, his gaze fixed ahead. Another figure lingers near a doorway, watching the street with quiet attention. There is no immediate threat, no sudden movement, but there is a tension now, something that hums beneath the surface. You take another step. The ground feels less certain underfoot, though nothing about it has changed. It is your awareness that has sharpened. Every sound carries a little further. Every shadow seems to hold more than just darkness. Ahead, a small group gathers near the corner. Their voices are low, their posture relaxed, but not careless. You cannot hear what they are saying, but the way they stand slightly angled toward one another suggests familiarity mixed with caution. One of them glances in your direction, then looks away just as quickly. You keep your distance. There is a lesser discussed detail found in some contemporary writings that many neighbourhoods developed informal systems of watchfulness at night. Not organised patrols in the modern sense, but a shared awareness among residents of who belonged and who did not. It was not always reliable, and it did not prevent every act of theft or violence, but it created a kind of shifting boundary. You move past the group, your pace steady but unhurried. A faint light flickers ahead. A lantern hung outside a doorway sways slightly in the evening air. Its glow is weak, barely reaching beyond a few feet, but it creates a small island of visibility in the growing dimness. You step into it briefly. The warmth of the light feels almost comforting, though you know it offers little real protection. Beyond its reach, the street continues in shadow shapes, blending together, edges softening. From somewhere behind you, footsteps quicken. You do not turn immediately. Instead, you listen. The rhythm is uneven, faster than a casual walk, slower than a full run. You step slightly to the side, allowing space. The figure passes you without contact, their movement purposeful, their presence brief. You exhale quietly. A question lingers in the background of many historical discussions. To what extent did residents feel constant fear at night, and to what extent did they simply adapt to it as part of daily life? Standing here, you sense that the answer is not simple. Fear exists, but it is not paralyzing. It is managed, contained, woven into routine. You continue forward. A door opens nearby and a burst of sound spills into the street. Laughter louder than anything you've heard so far tonight. The clink of glass, the low rise and fall of voices layered over one another. You glance toward the source, a saloon. The interior glows with a warmer light, shadows moving across the walls as people shift inside. For a moment it feels like a different world, one separated from the street by little more than a wooden frame. You pause just outside. A man leans against the doorway, his posture loose, his expression unreadable. He watches the street rather than the room behind him. When you pass, his gaze flicks towards you, then back again, as if marking your presence without attaching meaning to it. You move on. Further down the street narrows again and the light fades even more. Here the shadows feel thicker, more complete. You notice how your steps slow slightly, your body adjusting without conscious thought. A figure emerges from one of the darker spaces, stepping into your path just long enough to make you aware of them. There is no direct confrontation, no words exchanged, just a moment of shared space, then they move on, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. You feel your shoulders tense, then relax. A small, almost forgotten detail appears in some personal accounts. Many residents developed habits that reduced risk. Walking with purpose, avoiding certain corners, keeping interactions brief. These were not formal rules, but learned responses passed quietly from one person to another. You begin to follow that same pattern. Your gaze stays forward. Your pace remains even. You do not linger where you do not need to. The street bends once more, and as you follow it, you notice a different kind of presence. A uniformed figure stands near the edge of the road, partially lit by a distant lantern. A policeman. He does not move. He simply watches. There is a widely acknowledged understanding that police presence in these neighborhoods was inconsistent. At times visible, at times absent, often influenced by factors beyond simple law enforcement. Politics, relationships, and local influence all played a role in how protection was offered or withheld. You pass by him. For a brief moment you consider whether his presence changes anything, whether it offers safety or simply the appearance of it. His gaze shifts slightly as you move, tracking your path without intervening. Then you are past him. The street continues. The sounds soften again, the laughter from the saloon fading into the distance, replaced by quieter movements. A door closing, a voice speaking just above a whisper, the occasional echo of footsteps. You take a slow breath. The air feels cooler now, though no cleaner. It settles in your lungs with a steady weight, something you are beginning to accept rather than resist. You realize that the night does not bring a complete transformation. It does not erase what came before. It simply adds another layer, another set of conditions to navigate, another rhythm to follow. And as you take your next step forward, you understand that survival here is not about avoiding the night. It is about learning how to move through it. You keep walking, and as the night settles more fully, the street seems to grow quieter in a way that feels deceptive rather than peaceful. The noise does not disappear. It softens, folds inward, becoming something closer to a constant murmur that never quite fades. You notice a window slightly open above you. From inside, a cough drifts down into the street. It's not loud, but it lingers. You slow your steps without meaning to your attention drawn upward. The sound comes again, deeper this time, followed by a pause that stretches longer than it should. Then silence. Not complete, but enough to make the absence noticeable. You continue forward. A widely recognized reality of life in these neighborhoods is that disease was not a distant threat. It was present, constant moving, quietly through buildings, through families, through the very air people shared. Illness did not always announce itself dramatically. Often it began with something small, a cough, a fever, a weakness that did not fade. You pass beneath the window and the sound disappears behind you, replaced by the steady rhythm of your own footsteps. Further along, a door stands slightly open. Light spills out in a narrow line across the ground, cutting through the dimness of the street. You pause near it, not close enough to intrude, but near enough to observe. Inside the room is crowded. More crowded than the one you glimpsed earlier. A figure lies on a bed that looks too small for comfort. Another sits nearby, holding a cloth to their forehead. The air inside seems thicker, though you are not close enough to feel it directly. You can see the movement of breath, the careful, measured way it is taken. No one speaks loudly. The quiet here feels different from the quiet of rest. It is focused, intentional. You step back slightly, letting the door remain undisturbed. There is a lesser-known observation found in some historical descriptions that families often cared for the sick within these confined spaces with limited access to professional medical help. Hospitals existed, but they were not always accessible, and in many cases people relied on home remedies, shared knowledge, and whatever resources they could gather. You move on. The street narrows again, and the air seems to settle closer to the ground. You notice how the smell shifts slightly, becoming sharper, more concentrated. It is not one single scent, but a mixture that changes as you move. Dampness, smoke, something sour that lingers longer than the rest. You adjust your breathing again, slower, more deliberate. Ahead, a small group stands near a building entrance. Their voices are low, their posture subdued. You cannot hear the words, but the tone carries a weight that feels heavier than ordinary conversation. One of them turns slightly, revealing a face drawn tight with fatigue. You pass without stopping. An often cited fact from the period is that outbreaks of diseases like cholera and tuberculosis spread rapidly in densely populated areas, especially where sanitation systems were inadequate. These illnesses did not remain contained. They moved through entire blocks, sometimes entire neighborhoods, leaving a pattern that was difficult to interrupt. You feel that reality here not as a statistic, but as a presence. A door closes somewhere behind you, the sound sharper than expected. It echoes briefly, then fades. You glance back, but nothing draws your attention for long. The street absorbs the moment, quickly returning to its steady rhythm. You continue forward. A faint light flickers at the edge of your vision. Another window, this one closed, its glass reflecting the dim glow of a lamp inside. Shadows move across it, indistinct, suggesting motion without revealing details. You watch for a moment, then look away. There is a quiet curiosity in how much of life here remains unseen. You hear another cough, this time closer from somewhere at street level. You turn slightly, locating the source. A man sits on a low step, his posture bent forward, his hands resting loosely in front of him. He coughs again, covering his mouth with a worn sleeve. When he looks up, his expression is calm, almost detached. You meet his gaze briefly, then nod a small acknowledgement. He returns it with the slightest movement of his head. No words are needed. A thoughtful question continues to appear in historical discussions. How much did the people understand about the causes of these illnesses? And how much was left to guesswork and tradition? Germ theory was still developing during parts of the 19th century, and knowledge did not always reach every corner of the city at the same time. Standing here, it feels less like a question of knowledge and more like a question of options. You move on. The street bends again, and as you follow it, you notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Not lighter, not easier, but different. A small group of people gathers around a doorway, their voices quieter, their movements slower. A candle burns just inside. You do not need to step closer to understand. The stillness here is unmistakable. A more personal detail recorded in some accounts is that death in these neighborhoods was often a shared experience. It did not always remain confined within a single room. It reached outward, touching neighbors, friends, anyone connected by proximity or circumstance. You lower your gaze slightly as you pass. The candlelight flickers, gently steady despite the movement around it. You continue walking. The sounds of the street begin to return, gradually filling the space left by that brief moment of stillness. Footsteps, voices, the distant echo of laughter from somewhere further away, life continuing. You take a slow breath. The air feels the same as before, yet you carry a different awareness now. Something quieter, more settled. You realize that here, illness is not an interruption. It's part of the rhythm. It shapes how people move, how they speak, how they rest. It exists alongside everything else, woven into the fabric of daily life in a way that is difficult to separate. You step forward again. The street stretches ahead, unchanged on the surface, but layered now with everything you have seen, everything you have heard. And as you continue, you begin to understand that survival here is not only about avoiding danger, it is about enduring what cannot be avoided. You move onward, and gradually the night begins to thin at the edges, not fully gone, but loosening its grip. The street does not grow brighter so much as it becomes clearer again, as if your eyes have learned how to read it better. Shapes sharpen, movements feel more predictable. Work begins before rest ever truly settles. You notice it in the first figure you pass. A woman seated near a doorway, her hands already moving through a pile of fabric resting in her lap. The motion is steady, practiced, almost automatic. Needle in, thread pulled, needle out, again and again. She does not look up as you pass her, focus held tightly on the task. It feels early for such work, but here society does not follow the same rules. A well-documented aspect of life in 19th century slum districts is that many forms of labour took place within the home itself. Piecework, especially sewing, allowed individuals to earn small amounts of money without leaving their living space. The pay was minimal, often barely enough to cover basic needs, yet the work continued because there were few alternatives. You slow slightly, watching her hands. They move quickly yet with care. Each stitch matters. Each completed piece represents something tangible, even if the reward is small. You wonder how long she's been sitting there, how long she will continue. You move on. Further down the street, the sounds begin to build again. Not the scattered noise of night, but something more structured. The early rhythm of labour. A cart creaks into motion. A door opens with purpose rather than hesitation. Voices carry a different tone now, short, direct, focused. A man steps out of a building, adjusting his coat as he walks. His pace is quick, his gaze forward. He does not pause, does not look around. You sense that he has somewhere specific to be, somewhere that will not wait. You follow the direction of his movement for a few steps before turning your attention elsewhere. A small cluster of people gathers near the edge of the street, each holding something. Tools, bundles, small crates. They stand close together, speaking in low tones, occasionally glancing down the road as if expecting something to arrive. There is a recorded observation from the period that many labourers depended on daily or irregular work, often gathering in known locations to wait for employers to select them for short-term jobs. It was not guaranteed. Some would be chosen. Others would return home with nothing. You watch as a wagon approaches. It slows, then stops. A brief exchange takes place. Words you cannot hear, gestures you can. A few individuals step forward, their posture shifting, slightly more attentive now. The driver looks them over quickly, then nods to two of them. They climb aboard without delay. The others remain. The wagon moves on, carrying its chosen workers away. Those left behind stand still for a moment, then slowly begin to disperse. Some move to another corner. Others return the way they came. The pattern is quiet, but it carries weight. You continue walking. The street begins to feel busier now, though not crowded in the way it was earlier. This is a different kind of movement. More directed, more purposeful. Each person seems to be following a path already decided. You pass another doorway. Inside, a man sits at a small table, his hands working through a pile of shoes. The leather is worn, the soles thin. He repairs them carefully, piece by piece, restoring what he can. The light inside is dim, but steady enough to guide his work. An interesting detail appears in various personal accounts. Many tradespeople operated in extremely small spaces, often combining their living quarters with their workspace. This blurred the boundary between rest and labour. Work did not begin or end at a set time. It continued as long as there was something to be done. You move on carrying that thought with you. A faint call reaches your ears. Someone selling something again. This time the voice is softer, less urgent, but still persistent. You turn slightly and see a young boy holding a stack of newspapers, his arms straining slightly under the weight. He calls out the headlines. You cannot make out the words clearly, but the rhythm is familiar. Repetition, emphasis. The hope that someone will stop, will listen, will buy. You pause for a moment. He notices you, his voice shifting slightly, adjusting to your presence. There is a practice quality to it, an understanding of how to draw attention even when none is offered. Then you move on. A lesser known but frequently noted aspect of child labour during this time is that many young workers developed a strong sense of independence early on. They navigated the city alone, managed their earnings, and contributed directly to their household survival. It was not a choice made lightly. It was simply what was required. You continue forward. The street begins to open slightly, offering a wider view ahead. You can see more people now moving in intersecting paths, each carrying something, each engaged in their own small part of the larger system. A woman passes you balancing a basket on her arm. Inside you catch a glimpse of food. Bread, perhaps. Something simple, something necessary. Her pace is steady, her focus clear. She does not slow. You notice how little time is wasted here. Every movement serves a purpose. A thoughtful question continues to surface in historical analysis. To what extent did individuals feel trapped within these cycles of labour? And to what extent did they find ways to assert control over their circumstances, even in small ways? The answer is not easily seen from the outside. You watch the people around you. Some move quickly, their steps urgent. Others move more slowly, conserving energy. A few pause, briefly adjusting their load, catching their breath, then continuing on. There is no single pattern, only variation within constraint. You take a slow breath, feeling the air settle in your lungs. The street carries on its rhythm steady, its demands constant. And as you walk, you begin to understand that work here is not defined by a single task or a single place. It is everywhere. It begins early. It continues without pause. And for many, it never truly ends. You follow the widening street and the rhythm shifts again, this time towards something louder, more layered, more alive in a restless way. The sounds begin to stack on top of each other. Voices calling, metal striking wood. A burst of laughter that cuts through everything else, then fades into the background. You do not need to see it yet to know what lies ahead. A market. You step closer and the space opens just enough to hold the movement without containing it. Pushcarts line both sides of the street, their surfaces crowded with whatever can be sold. Bread stacked in uneven piles. Small cuts of meat laid out carefully, though not always cleanly. Vegetables, some fresh, some already soft at the edges. The air changes here. It is thicker with scent, but also sharper, more immediate. Food cooking nearby, smoke rising from a small grill, the faint sweetness of something baked. It blends with the familiar odours of the street, creating a contrast that feels both inviting and unsettling. You slow your pace. People move differently here. Less direct, more fluid. They pause, step closer, lean in to examine what is being offered. Bargaining begins before words are even spoken. A glance, a gesture, a slight shake of the head. A widely accepted observation in historical accounts is that street markets played a crucial role in feeding urban populations during the 19th century. For many residents of poorer districts, these informal markets were the primary source of affordable food, even if quality and safety could vary significantly. You watch a woman approach one of the carts. She lifts a piece of bread, turning it slightly in her hand, testing its firmness. The vendor speaks quickly, his tone persuasive but not aggressive. She responds just as quickly. There is a rhythm to the exchange, a balance between need and negotiation. They settle on a price. Coins change hands. The moment it ends and both move on, you take another step. A child weaves through the crowd, carrying a small tray balanced carefully in both hands. On it you see simple items, perhaps pastries, perhaps something fried. The child calls out softly, repeating the same phrase, adjusting the tone slightly depending on who passes. No one stops at first. Then someone does. The exchange is brief. The tray grows lighter. A lesser-known detail appears in some first-hand descriptions. Food sold in these markets was often stretched as far as possible. Ingredients were reused, repurposed, sometimes mixed in ways that would not be acceptable elsewhere. It was not always deception. It was necessity shaped by scarcity. You glance at one of the meat stalls. The cuts are small, uneven. The surface glistens slightly under the dim light. You notice how quickly they are handled, how little time they remain exposed before being wrapped or passed along. There is no room here for hesitation. You move on. A voice rises above the rest, louder, more insistent. A man stands behind his cart, calling out prices in rapid succession, his hands moving as quickly as his words. He points gestures, lifts items to display them more clearly. People gather. Not many, but enough. You notice how the crowd forms and dissolves, never staying still for long. Each person enters, engages, then moves on. The space remains in motion, always shifting, always adjusting. You step closer to the edge of it. The ground here is different. More worn, more compacted, but also more cluttered. Small scraps of paper, bits of food dropped and forgotten. A thin layer of residue that builds over time, changing the texture beneath your feet. You adjust your stance slightly, finding balance. A curious anecdote from the period notes that some residents became skilled at identifying the freshest goods simply by smell or touch, developing senses attuned to subtle differences that others might miss. Watching the people around you, you can see how that might be true. They do not examine items casually. They assess them quickly, decisively. You take a slow breath. The air here carries more than scent. It carries urgency. Hunger that is not always spoken but always present. Choices made quickly, sometimes without certainty. You notice a woman standing slightly apart from the crowd. She watches the carts, her gaze moving from one to another, calculating. She steps forward, then back again, as if weighing her options carefully. When she finally approaches, her movements are precise, deliberate. She selects only one item, pays, leaves. You follow her path with your eyes for a moment, then return your attention to the market. A thoughtful discussion continues among historians about how much agency individuals had within these systems of exchange. Were they active participants shaping their own outcomes, or were they largely constrained by forces beyond their control? The answer, like so much here, seems to exist somewhere in between. You step back slightly, creating space between yourself and the crowd. The noise continues, voices overlap, prices rise and fall, laughter appears, then disappears. The market does not pause, it does not settle, it exists in a constant state of movement. You begin to move again, leaving the densest part behind. As you do, the sounds soften gradually, though they do not vanish. The echoes remain carried along the street, blending into the wider rhythm of the district. You take another breath. The air feels slightly clearer now, though the difference is small. Enough to notice, not enough to change the overall weight of it. You realize that food here is not just sustenance. It is negotiation. It is timing. It is chance. And as you step forward once more, you carry that understanding with you, moving away from the noise, but not from what it represents. The street continues, and so does the search for enough. You drift away from the market noise, and the street settles into a different kind of rhythm, one shaped less by buying and selling and more by voices. Not just sound, but language itself, layered and overlapping, in ways that feel both chaotic and strangely ordered. You begin to notice the differences. A group passes you, speaking quickly in Irish, their tones rising and falling with a cadence that feels almost musical. Nearby, two men argue in German, their words sharp and clipped, their gestures precise. Further ahead, you hear Italian, softer at first, then swelling into laughter that carries down the street. You slow your pace. The street is no longer just a place of movement. It is a place of many worlds existing side by side. A broadly recognized reality of 19th century New York is that it was shaped by successive waves of immigration, with communities often clustering together in specific neighborhoods. These groups brought their languages, customs, foods, and traditions with them, creating distinct cultural pockets within the larger city. You see it in the details. A small shop window displays items you do not immediately recognize. The arrangement is careful, intentional, meant to draw in those who understand its value. A sign above the door is written in a language unfamiliar to you, its letters forming patterns that feel both foreign and precise. You continue walking. Two women stand near a doorway, speaking in low tones. Their conversation shifts between languages, blending words from one into another without pause. You catch fragments, but not enough to follow fully. It does not matter. The meaning is carried in their expressions, their gestures, the way they lean slightly toward one another. A lesser discussed detail in some personal accounts is how quickly people adapted to this environment of mixed languages. Even without formal education, many residents picked up enough words and phrases to navigate daily interactions, creating a kind of shared informal communication that bridged gaps. You notice it happening around you. A vendor calls out in one language, then repeats the same message in another. A passerby responds in a third, the exchange still understood. It is not perfect, but it works. You move further along. The street narrows again, and the buildings seem to press closer, as if drawing these communities inward. You sense a shift in atmosphere, subtle but present. The voices here are quieter, more contained. Conversations held closer, less likely to spill outward. A group of men stands near the corner, their posture relaxed but watchful. They speak in low tones, occasionally glancing at those who pass. You feel their attention briefly as you approach, then it fades as you move on. There is a well-known pattern noted in historical studies. Tensions between different immigrant groups were not uncommon, especially in areas where resources were limited and competition for work and housing was intense. These tensions did not always lead to open conflict, but they shaped interactions in ways that could be felt even in small moments. You sense that tension now, not in any direct way, but in the subtle distance between groups, the way people cluster with those who share their language, their background, their familiarity. You continue walking. A doorway opens suddenly and a burst of music spills into the street. It is lively, rhythmic, drawing attention immediately. You glance inside and see a small gathering people moving in close quarters, their steps quick and practiced. For a moment the mood shifts. The music cuts through the tension, offering something lighter, something shared. A curious detail appears in some accounts from the time. Despite divisions, there were moments when cultural exchange occurred naturally. Music in particular often crossed boundaries more easily than language, creating brief spaces where differences softened. You watch for a moment, then move on. Further ahead, you pass a small group of children sitting together on the edge of the street. They speak in a mix of languages, their words blending freely, unconcerned with structure or correctness. They laugh, correct one another, repeat phrases until they sound right. You realize they are learning, not in a formal sense, but through constant exposure, constant interaction. You slow your pace again. There is something fluid about this environment, something that resists rigid definition. Boundaries exist, but they shift, they bend, they adapt. A thoughtful question continues to appear in historical discussions. To what extent did these diverse communities maintain their original identities, and to what extent did they begin to form something new, something uniquely shaped by the city itself? The answer is not fixed. It changes depending on where you stand. You pass another shop. This one smells different, richer perhaps. Spices you cannot easily identify linger in the air, carried out through an open window. A man stands inside arranging items with care, his movements deliberate. He glances up as you pass. For a brief moment your eyes meet. There is no exchange of words, but something passes between you. Recognition, perhaps. Not of identity, but of presence. You are both part of this moment, even if only briefly. You continue forward. The street begins to open again, and with it the sounds spread out, becoming less concentrated. The languages still overlap, but they feel less confined, less intense. You take a slow breath. The air carries traces of everything you have passed. Food, smoke, voices, movement. You realize that this place is not defined by a single culture, a single story. It is shaped by many, each one layered over the others, sometimes blending, sometimes standing apart. And as you walk, you begin to understand that survival here is not only about adapting to the physical conditions. It's also about navigating these shifting social landscapes, learning where you belong, where you are accepted, and where you are not. You take another step. The street continues ahead, carrying with it all the voices that fill it, each one adding to the story that unfolds around you. You continue forward, and the street draws you toward another kind of doorway, one that seems to gather sound rather than release it. The closer you get, the more distinct it becomes. Not just voices, but layered voices. Laughter overlapping with argument. Glass striking wood. A chair scraping across the floor. A rhythm that feels almost inviting, though not entirely safe. You pause just outside. The door stands open. Warm light spills into the street, softer than the harsh glow of a single lamp, fuller somehow. It reaches your shoes, your hands just enough to contrast with the dimness behind you. Inside, figures move in close proximity, their outlines shifting against the walls, their presence filling every available space. You step in. The air changes immediately. Warmer, heavier, but also more active. It carries the scent of drink, of sweat, of wood that has absorbed years of use. The floor beneath your feet feels more solid than the street, though no less worn. Each step produces a muted sound, absorbed quickly by the noise around you. A widely documented aspect of life in these districts is the central role of saloons and informal lodging houses. They were not only places to drink, they functioned as social hubs, places where people gathered to share news, find work, escape the cold, or simply exist among others rather than alone. You move further inside. The room is crowded, though not chaotic. People stand in small clusters, their conversations overlapping but not colliding. Some sit at rough tables, their posture relaxed in a way you have not seen outside. Others lean against the walls, their attention shifting between their companions and the room itself. A man at the counter pours a drink, his movements efficient, repeated countless times. The liquid catches the light briefly before settling into the glass. He slides it across without hesitation. The exchange is quick, practiced. You notice how easily people move here. Even in the tight space there is a kind of flow, bodies adjust, shift. Make room without needing to be asked. It is not comfortable, but it is familiar to them. You take a step to the side, allowing someone to pass. They nod slightly, a brief acknowledgement, then continue on. From the corner a low melody begins to form, a fiddle perhaps. The notes are uneven at first, then settle into a steady pattern. Conversation does not stop, but it adjusts, weaving around the sound rather than competing with it. There is a lesser-known but frequently mentioned detail that music, even in its simplest forms, played an important role in these spaces. It offered a sense of continuity, a reminder of places left behind, and a way to create connection in environments where little else felt stable. You listen for a moment. The tune is not polished, but it carries something real, something grounded. A man nearby begins to tap his foot in time with it. Another joins, then another. The rhythm spreads quietly, not demanding attention, but shaping the atmosphere nonetheless. You move closer to one of the tables. A group sits together, their faces lit by the warm glow of a nearby lamp. They speak in low tones, their conversation focused, occasionally punctuated by brief laughter. One of them gestures with his hand, emphasizing a point. The others listen, then respond. You catch fragments of their words: work, money, someone who did not return. The details are incomplete, but the weight of them is clear. A well-established observation in historical research is that these spaces often served as informal networks for information. News travelled quickly here, passed from one person to another, sometimes accurate, sometimes altered, but always moving. You rest your hand lightly on the edge of the table, feeling the worn surface beneath your fingers. It is smooth in places, rough in others, shaped by years of contact. Across the room a staircase leads upward. A figure ascends, slowly disappearing into the dimness above. Lodging rooms, perhaps. Temporary spaces where people could rest, if only for a short time. You imagine what those rooms might be like. Similar to the tenements, perhaps, but offering something different. A pause. A break. A small but intriguing note appears in some first-hand accounts. Many lodging houses allowed multiple individuals to share a single bed in shifts, maximising space and cost efficiency. It was not ideal, but it provided an option for those who had none. You shift your weight slightly, adjusting your stance. The air feels thicker now, the warmth settling more heavily around you. You notice how your body responds, relaxing slightly despite the conditions. Not because it is comfortable, but because it is enclosed, contained in a way that the street is not. A thoughtful debate continues among historians about whether these spaces provided genuine relief or merely a temporary distraction from the hardships outside. The answer likely varies from person to person, from moment to moment. You glance toward the doorway. The street beyond is still there, dim and steady, waiting. Inside, the light flickers gently. Voices rise and fall. The fiddle continues its rhythm, steady, now anchoring the room. You take a slow breath. For a moment you allow yourself to stand still, to exist within this space, without moving forward or back. The sounds, the warmth, the closeness of it all settle around you. Then gradually you turn. You step back toward the door, the light shifting again as you cross the threshold. The air cools slightly, the noise softens, spreading out into the wider space of the street. Behind you the saloon continues without interruption. Ahead the street stretches on. You realize that places like this do not change the world outside, but they offer something within it. A brief pause, a shared moment, a way to continue. And as you take another step forward, leaving the warmth behind, you carry that understanding with you, moving once again into the steady rhythm of the night. You step back into the street and the warmth fades behind you, replaced again by the cooler, heavier air that seems to settle low along the ground. The sounds from the saloon stretch outward, thinning as they mix with the rest of the night until they become just another layer in the background. Ahead you notice a different kind of stillness, not the quiet of rest. Something more watchful. A figure stands beneath a dim lantern, their outline steady, their posture upright. As you move closer, the details become clearer. A uniform, a cap pulled low, a presence that suggests authority though not necessarily reassurance. A policeman. He does not move as you approach. His gaze shifts slightly, tracking the street, not fixed on any one person for long. When it briefly settles on you, it is neither welcoming nor hostile. It simply acknowledges that you are there. You continue walking. A broadly accepted reality in historical accounts is that policing in 19th century New York was uneven at best, especially in poorer districts. Officers were often outnumbered, underpaid, and influenced by local politics in ways that blurred the line between law enforcement and personal connection. You pass him slowly. For a moment you wonder what his presence means here, whether it deters trouble or simply observes it, whether he acts when needed or when it suits something beyond the immediate moment. He remains still as you move on. Further down the street, a small group gathers near the corner. Their conversation is quieter than those in the saloon, more contained. You catch fragments of words, names, places, a tone that suggests negotiation rather than casual talk. One of them notices you. It's a brief glance, but it carries weight. You feel it, then it passes, and their attention returns to the group. You keep your pace steady. There is a lesser-known observation found in some records that many neighborhoods developed informal systems of order, often tied to local figures who held influence beyond official authority. These could be community leaders, business owners, or individuals connected to political networks. Their presence shaped how disputes were handled, how favors were exchanged, how protection was offered or withheld. You begin to see hints of that structure here. A man steps forward from the group, his posture relaxed but deliberate. He speaks quietly to another, then gestures toward the street. The exchange is brief, but it seems to settle something. The tension eases slightly, though it does not disappear. You move past them. A doorway opens nearby and a woman steps out, glancing up and down the street before closing it behind her. Her movement is careful, measured. She does not linger outside. She chooses a direction and follows it without hesitation. You notice how often people look before they move, not out of fear exactly, but out of habit. A well-established detail in historical research is that local political machines such as Tammany Hall played a significant role in these neighborhoods. They offered assistance jobs and protection in exchange for loyalty, particularly during elections. This created a complex system where official authority and local influence often overlapped. You continue walking, letting that thought settle. A man approaches from the opposite direction, his steps uneven, his expression distant. He brushes past you without acknowledgement, his shoulder grazing yours slightly. You feel the contact brief but noticeable, then it is gone. You do not turn. The street absorbs the moment just as it does at everything else. Ahead you see another figure in uniform, this one moving rather than standing still. He walks slowly, his gaze shifting from one side of the street to the other. When he passes a doorway, he pauses briefly listening, then continues on. You watch him for a moment. There is a pattern to his movement, though not a strict one. He follows no visible route, yet his path seems familiar, as if he has walked it many times before. A curious detail appears in some first-hand accounts. Residents often recognized individual officers and developed opinions about them based on their behavior. Some were seen as fair, others as indifferent, others as corrupt. Trust was not automatic. It was earned or lost over time. You continue forward. The street bends slightly, and as you follow it, the sounds shift again. A raised voice, a sudden burst of argument. You slow, not stopping, but becoming more aware. Two men stand facing each other, their gestures sharp, their voices tense. Others stand nearby, watching but not intervening. The moment feels close to tipping into something more. Then it does not. One of the men steps back, his hands lowering. The other exhales, the tension draining from his posture. The crowd disperses almost immediately, the moment dissolving as quickly as it formed. You keep moving. There is an ongoing discussion among historians. about how often conflicts in these neighbourhoods escalated into violence and how often they were resolved before reaching that point. The records do not always capture the smaller moments, the ones that end quietly without leaving a trace. You have just seen one. The street continues. A faint light flickers from a window above, casting uneven shadows across the ground. You step through them, your pace steady, your breathing even. You begin to notice how your awareness has changed. You no longer react to every sound. You no longer hesitate at every movement. You have adjusted, even if only slightly. A man leans against the wall ahead, his posture relaxed, his gaze distant. He does not move as you pass. He does not speak. He simply exists within the space part of the larger pattern that continues around him. You take a slow breath. The air feels familiar now. Not comfortable, not clean, but known. You realize that order here does not come from a single source. It is not imposed fully from above, nor created entirely from within. It is a balance. A shifting arrangement of authority, influence, habit, and necessity. And as you walk, you begin to understand that survival in this place depends not only on strength or endurance, but on awareness. On knowing when to move, when to pause, when to speak, and when to remain silent. You take another step forward. The street stretches ahead, carrying with it the quiet watchfulness that never fully fades. You move deeper into the street and the pace around you steadies again, less sharp than before, more contained. The night holds, but its edge softens, slightly shaped now by quieter routines that continue regardless of the hour. You notice a window lit from within, not bright, but steady. Inside, a woman stands at a table, her hands moving through a series of small tasks. You cannot see everything clearly, but you recognize the pattern. Folding cloth, adjusting something in a pot, reaching for another item without needing to look. The motions are continuous, unbroken. You slow your steps, drawn to the rhythm of it. A widely recognized reality in historical studies is that women carried much of the invisible labor within these households, managing food, clothing, childcare, and often contributing to income through small-scale work. Their efforts rarely paused, even when the rest of the street seemed to settle. You watch for a moment longer. A child moves into view, standing near the table. The woman turns slightly, her hand resting briefly on the child's shoulder, before returning to her task. The gesture is small, almost instinctive, but it carries a quiet reassurance. You continue walking. Further along, another doorway stands open. Inside, a different scene unfolds. A narrow room, crowded but organized in its own way. Bedding stacked to one side. A small stove glowing faintly in the corner. Two women sit close together, speaking in low tones, while their hands move through fabric stitching carefully by the light of a single lamp. Their conversation flows easily, their work never slowing. A lesser highlighted detail found in some personal accounts is how often women formed networks of support within these environments. They shared resources, exchanged knowledge, and provided assistance during illness or hardship. These connections were not always formal, but they were essential. You step closer to the doorway, not entering but near enough to hear the soft cadence of their voices. The words themselves remain unclear, but the tone carries warmth, familiarity, a sense of mutual understanding. One of them glances toward the door, noticing you, not with suspicion but with awareness. You nod slightly, then move on. The street shifts again. You pass a woman carrying a bundle, her steps careful but steady. The weight of it is clear in the way she holds it close, her arms firm, her posture aligned to support it. She moves with purpose, her gaze fixed ahead. No hesitation, no wasted motion. A well-documented observation in historical research is that many women in these districts managed both domestic responsibilities and external work, balancing multiple roles within limited time and space. This constant effort shaped the rhythm of daily life in ways that were often overlooked in broader narratives. You follow her path briefly, then turn your attention elsewhere. A faint sound reaches you from above. A lullaby, soft and uneven, carried through an open window. The melody is simple, repeated gently, its purpose clear even if the words are not. You pause. The sound settles around you, creating a brief pocket of calm within the movement of the street. It does not last long. Another noise rises, a door closing, footsteps approaching, and the lullaby fades into the background. You continue forward. A curious detail appears in some accounts from the time. Despite the crowded conditions, many families developed small routines that created a sense of structure. Mealtimes, shared tasks, moments of rest when possible. These routines provided stability even when the environment itself remained unpredictable. You notice those patterns now. A woman sweeping the edge of the doorway, her movements slow and deliberate. Another adjusting a piece of cloth over a window blocking the draft. A third speaking quietly to a neighbour, their conversation brief but meaningful. These actions are small, but they repeat. Again. You begin to understand their importance. A thoughtful discussion continues among historians about how much agency women held within these constrained environments. While limited by social and economic structures, they often exercise control within their immediate surroundings, shaping daily life in subtle but significant ways. You see that control here, not in grand gestures but in consistency. In attention, in care. You pass another doorway. Inside, a woman sits alone, her posture slightly bent, her hands resting in her lap. For a moment she is still, not working, not moving, simply existing within the space. Then slowly she rises, returns to her task. The pause is brief, but it matters. You continue walking. The street feels quieter now, not empty but less urgent. The movements around you are slower, more measured. The night has settled into its deeper phase where activity continues but at a different pace. You take a slow breath. The air feels familiar again, its weight no longer surprising. You realize that much of what holds this place together is not visible at first glance. It exists in repetition, in small acts carried out without recognition, in the steady presence of those who continue regardless of the conditions around them. You take another step. The street stretches ahead, shaped not only by hardship but by the quiet strength that moves through it, often unnoticed. And as you walk, you begin to see that survival here is not only about enduring what is difficult, it is also about maintaining what is necessary, even when no one is watching. You move onward, and the street begins to guide you toward a quieter corner where the noise softens and the movement slows into something more deliberate. The buildings here feel no different, yet the atmosphere shifts. There is a sense of pause, not from exhaustion but from intention. A small doorway stands ahead, marked by a simple sign. The light inside is steady, not flickering like a saloon, not dim like a tenement hallway. It feels calmer, more contained. You step closer. Inside, a few figures sit in rows, their posture upright, their attention focused forward. A man stands at the front, speaking in a measured tone, his hands resting lightly against a worn surface that serves as a lectern. His voice does not rise above the space, yet it carries clearly. You remain near the entrance, not fully stepping in. A well-established understanding in historical research is that religious institutions and charitable missions played a visible role in 19th century urban slums. They offered food, shelter and guidance, though often accompanied by expectations about behaviour, belief and reform. You listen. The words are simple, direct. They speak of improvement of order, of a different way of living. The tone is calm but firm, as if shaping not only thought but action. A few heads nod, others remain still. You notice how the space is arranged. Not crowded, not empty, just enough people to create presence without pressure. A contrast to the density outside. You step back and slay. From the side, another room opens into view. A table holds small portions of food. Bread, soup, basic but prepared with care. A woman stands beside it, offering portions one at a time, her movements steady, her expression neutral. A lesser highlighted detail found in some personal writings is that many charitable efforts were deeply intertwined with moral instruction. Assistance was often conditional, tied to expectations about sobriety, work habits, or religious participation. It was help, but not without structure. You watch as a man approaches the table. He receives a portion, nods briefly and steps away. No words are exchanged beyond what is necessary. You turn back toward the street. The transition feels immediate. The quiet order of the interior gives way to the layered unpredictability outside. The sounds return, though softer than before, carried along by the late hour. You continue walking. A woman passes you, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her expression is distant, her steps measured. You wonder if she has come from the same place you just left, or if she is heading toward it. There is no clear way to know. A frequently noted observation in historical accounts is that not all residents welcome the presence of reformers and charitable organisations. Some viewed them as helpful, others saw them as intrusive, imposing values that did not align with their own realities. You sense that complexity here, not in any direct confrontation, but in the subtle ways people move. Some approach these spaces with intention, others pass by without a glance. You continue forward. The street narrows again, and you hear another sound rising from a nearby building. Singing, not loud, not polished, but collective. Several voices blending together, uneven at times, but steady in their effort. You pause near the doorway. Inside, a small group gathers, their faces lit by a single lamp. The song continues simple and repetitive, its rhythm easy to follow. It carries a different kind of weight than the music you heard earlier in the saloon. Less about escape, more about grounding. A curious anecdote appears in some accounts from the time. In certain neighbourhoods, hymn singing and communal prayer became ways for people to create moments of shared calm even in the midst of difficult conditions. These gatherings were not always formal, but they held meaning for those who participated. You listen for a moment longer, then move on. Further along, you notice a man distributing small pamphlets. He offers one to a passerby who takes it without stopping. Another declines with a slight shake of the head. The man continues, undeterred, his movements consistent, his purpose clear. You glance at one of the pamphlets as it passes through another set of hands. The text is small, tightly printed, its message likely similar to what you heard inside earlier. Guidance, instruction, a call to change. You continue walking. A thoughtful question appears often in historical discussions. To what extent did these efforts lead to meaningful improvement in living conditions? And to what extent did they focus more on individual behaviour rather than structural change? The answer is not simple, and it shifts depending on perspective. You pass another doorway. Inside, a woman tends to a small group of children, guiding them through what appears to be a lesson. Her voice is patient, her gestures clear. The children follow along, some attentive, others distracted, their focus moving in and out. The space is modest but organised. You realise that learning, like everything else here, adapts to the environment. It finds a way to exist within limited space, limited time, limited resources. You step back into the street, fully leaving the doorway behind. The sounds settle again into their familiar pattern. Movement, voices, the quiet presence of life continuing. You take a slow breath. The air feels unchanged, yet your awareness shifts slightly. You begin to see that not all efforts here are about immediate survival. Some are about direction, about shaping what might come next, even if that future feels uncertain. You take another step. The street continues ahead, carrying with it both the weight of the present and the quiet attempts to reshape it. And as you walk, you understand that survival here is not only about enduring the moment, it's also about imagining something beyond it, even if that vision remains fragile. You continue along the street, and the air begins to shift again this time, carrying a subtle chill that settles into your hands and along your neck. It is not sudden, not harsh, but steady enough that you become aware of it with each breath. The night deepens. A window above you rattles slightly as a draft slips through the narrow gap. You glance up, noticing how loosely it sits in its frame. The wood around it is worn edges softened by time and weather. It does not fully close. Perhaps it never did. You pull your coat closer without thinking. A commonly recorded fact about tenement housing in this period is that many buildings were poorly constructed or maintained, leaving them vulnerable to cold dampness and structural weakness. Insulation was minimal, and residents often relied on whatever materials they could gather to block drafts and retain warmth. You feel that reality now. Even outside, the cold seems to seep from the buildings themselves, as if the walls cannot hold it back. You move forward. From a nearby doorway, a faint glow spills onto the street. Not the steady light of a lamp, but the softer, uneven flicker of a fire. You step closer, drawn by the warmth it promises. Inside, a small stove burns. A woman kneels beside it, adjusting the coals with careful attention. The flame responds slowly, rising just enough to brighten the room. Around her, a few others sit close, their bodies angled toward the heat, their hands extended slightly to capture what warmth they can. The space is tight, the air is thick, but the fire holds their focus. A less frequently emphasized detail in some historical descriptions is how central small heating sources were to daily life during colder months. Coal, when available, was used carefully. When it was not, people turned to wood scraps, paper, anything that would burn long enough to make a difference. You watch the flame for a moment. It flickers, then steadies, then flickers again. The woman adjusts it once more, her movements precise, practiced. She knows how to manage it, how to keep it alive without wasting what little fuel she has. You step back, letting the doorway close behind you. The cold returns quickly. You continue walking. The street feels quieter now, the movement slower, as if the temperature itself has softened the pace. People pass you with their shoulders slightly hunched, their hands tucked close to their bodies. Conversations are shorter, voices lower. You notice how many windows are covered. Cloth, paper, anything that can be pressed into place to block the wind. Some are secured tightly, others hang loosely, shifting with each draft. A well-established observation in historical studies is that overcrowded housing, combined with inadequate heating, created difficult conditions during winter months. Cold air moved easily through poorly sealed structures, and residents often slept in layers, sharing blankets and body heat to stay warm. You imagine those rooms now, the close arrangement of bodies, the careful positioning to conserve warmth, the effort it takes just to remain comfortable enough to rest. You take a slow breath. The air feels sharper in your lungs. Further ahead, a faint crackling sound reaches you. You follow it. A small fire burns at the edge of the street, contained within a shallow metal container. A few figures gather around it, their faces lit by the glow, their expressions calm but tired. They do not speak much. The silence here feels different. Not empty, but shared. You step closer just enough to feel the edge of the warmth. It is slight, but noticeable. A curious anecdote appears in some first-hand accounts. In colder seasons, people sometimes gathered around shared fires in streets or courtyards, creating temporary spaces of warmth and quiet companionship. These gatherings were not formal, but they offered a brief sense of relief. You stand there for a moment. The fire shifts, a small burst of sparks rising briefly before settling again. One of the figures reaches forward, adjusting a piece of wood, careful not to disturb the balance. You notice how deliberate the movement is. Nothing is wasted. You step back, allowing the warmth to fade gradually rather than all at once. The cold returns, settling into your clothes, your skin, your breath. You continue walking. A sudden sound breaks the quiet. A shout. Sharp, brief, then gone. You pause, listening. Nothing follows. The street absorbs it quickly, returning to its steady rhythm. A thoughtful discussion continues among historians about how environmental conditions such as cold and poor housing contributed to broader patterns of illness and mortality in these neighborhoods. It is not a simple cause and effect. It is a combination of factors, each reinforcing the other. You feel that connection now. The cold, the dampness, the closeness of the buildings, each one shaping the experience of those who live here. You pass another doorway. Inside, a family gathers close together, their bodies arranged in a way that maximizes warmth. A blanket draped over their shoulders. A small child tucked between two adults. The light is dim, but enough to see the outline of their forms. You do not linger. You move on. The street stretches ahead, quieter now, the sounds more distant, the movement more subdued. You take a slow breath. The air feels colder than before, though it may simply be your awareness sharpening again. You realize that here comfort is not abroad. It is created, piece by piece, through effort, through adaptation, through small repeated actions that make the difference between enduring and struggling. You take another step forward. The street continues, carrying the cold with it, but also the quiet determination of those who move through it. And as you walk, you begin to understand that survival in this place is not only about facing what is harsh, it's about shaping it even slightly into some bearable. You move on and the street narrows again, drawing you into a quieter stretch where the sounds feel more contained, less scattered. The air holds steady, neither warmer nor colder, but your awareness sharpens in a different way now. It is not the environment that shifts first. It is the feeling of being watched. You do not see it immediately, but you sense it. A figure leans against the wall ahead, their posture relaxed, one foot resting lightly behind them. Their presence does not interrupt the street, yet it anchors a small section of it. As you approach, their gaze lifts, meeting yours for a brief moment before sliding past. You continue walking. A commonly recognized element of life in these districts is the presence of organized street groups, often referred to as gangs, which formed around shared identity, protection, and territory. These groups could provide a sense of belonging, but they also contributed to tension and conflict within the neighborhood. You notice how people move around this figure, not avoiding entirely, but adjusting. A slight shift in path, a brief lowering of the gaze, small changes that signal awareness without drawing attention. You follow the same pattern without thinking. Further along, another group gathers near the corner. This one is more defined. Several individuals stand close together, their conversation quiet but focused. Their posture suggests familiarity but also control. They are not simply passing time, they are holding space. One of them steps slightly forward as you approach, not blocking your path but marking it. You slow just enough to acknowledge the presence, then continue. No words are exchanged. That is enough. A lesser-known detail found in some historical descriptions is that many of these groups developed their own internal codes of behavior, rules that governed loyalty, territory, and interaction. These rules were not written, but they were understood by those who lived within them. You begin to see how that understanding shapes the street. It is not random. It is structured, though not in ways that are immediately visible. You continue walking. A faint marking catches your eye on the wall beside you. Scratched into the surface, worn but still visible. It does not form a clear image, but it repeats along the length of the building, appearing again and again at irregular intervals. You run your fingers lightly over one of them. The grooves are shallow but deliberate. A curious anecdote appears in some accounts from the time. Certain gangs mark their presence through symbols or patterns carved into walls or objects, subtle signals that indicated territory or identity. These markings were not always obvious to outsiders, but they carried meaning for those who recognized them. You step back. The wall returns to being just a wall, though you now see it differently. Ahead, the street bends slightly, and as you follow it, the atmosphere tightens again. Voices are lower here, movements more controlled. You notice how quickly conversations stop as you pass, then resume once you are beyond hearing range. You keep your pace steady. A man steps out from the doorway, his expression unreadable. He watches you for a moment, then turns away, disappearing back inside without a word. The interaction is brief, but it lingers. A well-documented observation in historical research is that reputation played a significant role in these environments. Knowing who someone was, where they belonged, and how they behaved could influence how they were treated. For outsiders, this lack of recognition created uncertainty. You feel that uncertainty now, not as fear, but as distance. You continue forward. A sudden burst of laughter breaks the tension coming from a group gathered further down. You glance toward it and see a cluster of young men, their posture relaxed, their expressions open. One of them gestures broadly as he speaks, the others responding with easy amusement. For a moment, the atmosphere shifts. The edge softens. You slow slightly watching. There is something familiar in their interaction. Not the content, but the tone, shared experience, inside jokes, a sense of belonging that exists within the group separate from the street itself. A thoughtful discussion appears in historical analysis. To what extent did these groups provide protection and community, and to what extent did they contribute to instability and violence? The answer depends on perspective, on proximity, on experience. You move on. The laughter fades behind you, replaced again by the quieter, more controlled rhythm of the street. A figure passes you quickly, their movement sharp, purposeful. You step aside instinctively, allowing space. They do not acknowledge you, and you do not expect them to. The street continues. You notice how your own movements have changed. More measured, more aware. You no longer walk without thinking. Each step carries intention. A door slams somewhere behind you, the sound echoing briefly before settling into the background. You do not turn. You keep moving. You begin to understand that this place operates on layers of recognition and response. Some visible, some hidden, some learned only through time. You take a slow breath. The air feels steady again, familiar in its weight. You realize that survival here is not only about avoiding danger or enduring hardship. It's about understanding the patterns that shape the space around you. Who stands where, who moves when, what is said, and what is left unsaid. You take another step forward. The street stretches ahead, carrying those patterns with it, repeating them in subtle variations. And as you walk, you begin to see that even in a place shaped by tension, there is a kind of order. Not fixed, not simple, but present. You move forward and the street grows quieter in a different way now. Not tense, not watchful, but softened. The sounds settle lower as if held closer to the ground. Footsteps become more deliberate, voices carry less distance. Something has shifted. You notice it first in the way people gather. Not in tight circles, not in the loose clusters you have seen before, but in smaller, more still arrangements. A doorway stands open ahead, and near it a few figures remain close together. Their posture subdued, their movements minimal. You slow your pace. There is no need to step closer to understand the tone. Inside a candle burns. Its light is steady, not flickering, not wavering, held carefully within the room. The glow reaches outward just enough to touch the threshold, marking a boundary between inside and out. You pause at a respectful distance. A widely acknowledged reality in 19th century slum districts is that death was a frequent presence, often occurring within the home due to limited access to medical care and the spread of disease. Families and neighbours took on the responsibility of mourning, preparing and remembering. You lower your gaze slightly. The figures near the doorway do not speak much. When they do, their voices remain low, their words measured. One person places a hand gently on another's shoulder, the gesture simple but carrying weight. You remain still for a moment. The street continues around you, but more quietly here, as if adjusting itself to the presence of something that cannot be hurried. A lesser noted detail from personal accounts is that wakes were often held within the home, sometimes lasting through the night. Neighbours would come and go, offering support, sharing memories, maintaining a quiet presence that extended beyond the immediate family. You can sense that pattern now. A figure approaches the doorway, pauses, then steps inside. Another exits slowly, their head slightly lowered, their expression composed but distant. The movement is continuous but never rushed. You step back slightly, allowing space. The candlelight remains steady. You continue walking. Further along the street opens just enough to carry the sound of a distant bell. It is faint, irregular, not part of a formal rhythm, but it marks something nonetheless. You listen for a moment, then let it fade into the background. A small cart passes you, its movements slower than those you have seen before. The man guiding it keeps his eyes forward, his posture steady. The cart itself is simple, covered lightly, its purpose clear, without needing to be examined. You step aside. The moment passes quietly. A well-documented observation in historical research is that burial costs, even for the poorest families, could be a significant burden. Many relied on charity or public arrangements, leading to what were known as pauper burials, where individuals were laid to rest with minimal ceremony. You feel the weight of that reality here, not as a single event, but as part of the ongoing rhythm. You continue forward. A woman stands near the edge of the street, her hands clasped tightly together. She watches the passing cart, her gaze steady, her expression difficult to read. She does not move until it has gone, then slowly turns away, returning to the doorway behind her. You do not follow. You move on. A quiet observation appears in some historical reflections. In communities where loss was common, people developed ways to carry grief without allowing it to halt daily life entirely. Mourning and survival existed side by side, each shaping the other. You begin to understand that balance. The street does not stop. It adjusts. A door opens nearby and a child steps out, their movement cautious at first, then more certain. They glance toward the direction where the cart disappeared and then back toward the interior. For a moment they remain still, caught between spaces. Then they step fully into the street. Life continues. You take a slow breath. The air feels unchanged, yet the atmosphere carries something softer now, something quieter. You notice how your own pace has slowed. Not out of caution, but out of respect. You continue walking. The sounds begin to return gradually. A voice speaking a little louder. Footsteps gaining a bit more rhythm. The street reclaims its movement, though it does not erase what has just passed. It simply folds it into the pattern. A thoughtful line of inquiry often appears in historical discussion. How did individuals in these environments process repeated experiences of loss, and what emotional strategies allowed them to continue forward? The answers are not easily recorded, but traces of them remain in moments like this. You carry that awareness with you. A window above you closes gently, the sound soft, deliberate. A small action, but one that feels connected to everything you have just witnessed. You continue on. The street stretches ahead, familiar yet altered shape by the presence of what cannot be avoided. You realize that survival here is not only about endurance or adaptation, it is also about carrying memory. Quietly, without pause, without display, you take another step, and the street continues holding both the living and the remembered within its steady, unbroken flow. You continue walking, and the street begins to feel different again, not quieter, not louder, but more observed. There is a sense that something is being noticed, recorded, even if you cannot immediately see how. A figure stands at the edge of the road, not blending into the movement like the others. He holds something in his hands, a notebook. You slow your pace. He watches the street with a careful stillness, his gaze moving from one detail to another. The buildings, the people, the ground itself. Every so often he lowers his eyes and writes his hand, moving quickly across the page before lifting again. He is not part of the rhythm. He is studying it. A well-established fact in historical research is that during the late 19th century, journalists and reformers began documenting the conditions of urban slums in increasing detail. Their work brought attention to overcrowding, sanitation issues, and poverty often influencing public awareness and policy. You pass him slowly. He glances at you briefly, then returns to his observations. Further along, another figure stands near a doorway, this one holding a camera mounted on a simple tripod. The device looks heavy, its structure solid and deliberate. He adjusts it carefully, positioning it toward the street. You pause at a distance. He does not rush. Each movement is measured, intentional. He checks the angle, the light, the position of those passing through the frame. People notice him, some turning away, others staring back with curiosity or unease. A lesser-known but significant detail is that early documentary photography played a crucial role in revealing living conditions in these neighborhoods. Images captured by photographers provided a visual record that written descriptions alone could not fully convey. You watch as he prepares the shot. A man passes through the frame, then another. A child pauses, looking directly at the camera, then is pulled gently aside by an older figure. The moment shifts constantly, never settling for long. Finally, the photographer acts. The exposure is brief, but it holds something. A fragment of the street, a piece of its reality. You move on. The presence of these observers lingers in your thoughts. They are part of the street, yet separate from it. Engaged, but not embedded. You continue walking. A small group gathers nearby, their attention focused on another man, speaking with quiet intensity. He gestures towards the buildings, the ground, the space between. His words carry a different tone from the conversations you have heard before, more structured, more deliberate. You catch fragments. Change, improvement, conditions. The people listening respond in varied ways. Some nod, others remain still. A few look away, their attention drifting. A widely recognized observation in historical analysis is that reform movements often faced mixed reactions from residents. While some welcomed efforts to improve living conditions, others were skeptical, uncertain whether these changes would truly benefit them or disrupt what little stability they had. You move past the group. The street continues. A pamphlet lies on the ground near your foot. You glance down at it, its edges worn, its surface marked by the passing of many steps. You do not pick it up, but you notice the printed words, the structured lines, the attempt to communicate something beyond the immediate moment. You step over it and continue. A curious anecdote appears in some accounts. Reformers sometimes struggle to fully understand the daily realities of the people they aim to help, leading to solutions that addressed symptoms without resolving underlying issues. The gap between observation and lived experience was not always easy to bridge. You feel that distance now, not as a judgment, but as a difference. You continue forward. A building stands ahead, its exterior marked by signs of wear, but also by something new. A small notice posted near the entrance. Official in appearance. Its presence suggests regulation oversight and attempt to impose order. You pause briefly, reading what you can. The language is formal, structured, outlining expectations, requirements. It speaks of standards, of improvements, of compliance. You step back. The street absorbs the notice just as it does everything else. Some glance at it. Others pass without a look. A thoughtful question continues to surface in historical discussions. To what extent did reforms succeed in improving conditions, and to what extent were they limited by broader economic and social forces? The answer unfolds slowly, unevenly, shaped by many factors. You move on. The sounds of the street return to their familiar pattern. Movement, voices, the steady flow of life continuing. The observers remain behind you now, their presence fading into the background. But their influence lingers. You begin to understand that change, when it comes, does not arrive all at once. It is gradual, measured, often incomplete. You take a slow breath. The air feels the same, yet carries the weight of possibility, however uncertain. You step forward. The street stretches ahead, holding both the reality of the present and the quiet efforts to reshape it. And as you walk, you realize that survival here is not only about enduring what is, it is also about navigating what might become. You keep walking, and the street begins to loosen its grip just a little, not by becoming easier, but by revealing something quieter beneath the strain. The noise softens at the edges. The urgency eases, not gone, but held back for a moment. You notice it first in the sound of music again, not from a crowded room this time, but from somewhere further down, where the street widens just enough to gather people without pressing them too tightly together. The melody drifts toward you, light and uneven, carried by a single instrument and a few scattered voices. You follow it. A small group stands in a loose circle. Not organized, not formal, just gathered. One man plays a simple tune on a fiddle, his bow moving steadily, his expression calm. Around him, a few others listen, some tapping their feet, others swaying slightly where they stand. You stop at the edge. No one notices you. Or if they do, it does not matter. A well-documented aspect of daily life in these neighborhoods is that, despite difficult conditions, people created moments of leisure and social connection whenever possible. Music, storytelling, and small gatherings provided relief, even if only briefly. You let the sound settle around you. It is not perfect. The notes waver slightly, but it holds. A woman nearby laughs softly at something said just beyond your hearing. The sound is quick, genuine, unforced. It fades, but it leaves something behind. You notice how people stand here, closer than they might elsewhere, but not pressed together. Each person holds their own space, yet remains part of the group. There is no urgency in their movement, no immediate task pulling them away. For a moment, time feels different. You take a slow breath. The air carries less attention here, though nothing about the environment has changed. It is the intention that shifts, the choice to pause even briefly. A lesser-known detail appears in some personal accounts. In crowded urban districts, small celebrations or spontaneous gatherings often emerged without planning, shaped by shared experience rather than formal invitation. These moments did not last long, but they mattered. You see that now. A child moves into the circle. Their steps uncertain at first, then more confident as they mimic the rhythm of the music. The others watch, some smiling, some offering quiet encouragement. The child's movements are simple, but they carry a sense of ease that feels rare. You remain still observing. The fiddle continues. The melody repeats. You begin to recognize its pattern. A curious note found in some historical descriptions is that music from different cultural traditions often blended in these spaces, creating new sounds that reflected the diversity of the community. What begins as one tune shifts slightly as others join, adding their own influence. You listen more closely only. There is something familiar in the structure but altered, shaped by the hands that play it. A man nearby begins to hum along, his voice low, steady. Another joins, then another. The sound builds gradually, not overwhelming but fuller. You notice how your own body responds. Your shoulders relax slightly. Your steps, when you take them, feel less measured. You move a little closer. The circle adjusts without breaking, making space without needing to acknowledge it. You're included not by invitation but by presence. A thoughtful line of inquiry often appears in historical discussion. How did people maintain a sense of identity and joy in environments defined by hardship? The answer is not always recorded directly, but it can be seen in moments like this. You feel it, not as a grand expression, but as something small, sustained. A man begins to tell a story, his voice rising just enough to be heard over the music. The details are unclear, but the rhythm of his speech draws attention. The group listens, their focus shifting from the melody to his words, then back again. Laughter follows, soft at first, then growing. It spreads through the group, connecting them in a way that feels natural, unforced. You find yourself smiling without thinking. The street beyond continues as it always does. People pass by, some pausing briefly, others moving on without stopping. The moment exists within the larger flow, not interrupting it but adding to it. You take another slow breath. The air feels the same yet lighter. You realize that these moments do not erase the hardship. They do not change the conditions, but they create space within them. A brief opening, a place to rest, even if only for a few minutes. The music begins to fade. Not suddenly, but gradually as the player lowers his bow, the final notes lingering before disappearing into the night. The group remains for a moment longer, then begins to disperse. No announcement, no formal ending, just a quiet return to movement. You step back. The space closes the street, reclaiming its usual rhythm. But something remains, a trace. You carry it with you as you continue walking. The sounds settle again into their familiar pattern. Footsteps, voices, the steady flow of life. You realize that survival here is not only about enduring difficulty or navigating danger. It's also about holding on to these small moments, letting them exist, letting them matter. You take another step forward. The street stretches ahead, unchanged in appearance but shaped by everything that has just passed. And as you walk, you understand that even in the most difficult places, there are moments that belong entirely to those who create them. Quiet, brief, but real. You move on, leaving the fading circle of music behind, and the street begins to stretch out in a different way. Not wider exactly, but less crowded. The press of bodies eases. The noise thins into something more spaced out, more uneven. You notice it in your breathing first. It feels easier. Still heavy, still carrying the familiar mix of smoke and dampness, but with more room between each inhale and exhale. You had not realized how much you had adjusted until now. Ahead, the buildings change slightly. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. The walls appear a little less worn. The windows, though still simple, are more intact. Some even have glass that reflects light rather than absorbing it entirely. The doors sit more firmly in their frames. You slow your steps. This is not a different world, but it is not quite the same one either. A broadly supported conclusion in urban historical studies is that within 19th century cities, even small shifts in location could reflect noticeable differences in living conditions. Blocks only a short distance apart might vary in cleanliness, crowding, and stability shaped by rent costs, ownership patterns, and local development. You feel that shift now. A man passes you carrying a bundle of tools. His clothes are still worn but cleaner than most you have seen. His pace is steady, not rushed. He does not look over his shoulder as he walks. You continue forward. A woman stands near a doorway speaking quietly with another. Their postures relaxed, their conversation unhurried. One of them gestures toward the street behind you, then back toward the building as if marking a boundary you have just crossed. You glance back briefly. The street you came from remains visible, but it feels further away than it should. You turn forward again. A lesser discussed detail appears in some personal writings from the time. For certain families moving even a short distance into a slightly improved area represented a significant step, a gradual shift rather than a sudden escape. Progress when it came was often measured in small changes rather than dramatic transformation. You notice how the ground beneath your feet feels more solid here, less uneven, still worn but maintained. A child walks past you carrying a small book. They hold it carefully as if aware of its value. Their steps are slower, more deliberate, not darting through the spaces you have seen elsewhere. You watch them for a moment, then continue on. A curious observation recorded in some accounts is that access to education, even in limited forms, could influence daily rhythms and long-term opportunities. It did not guarantee change, but it opened possibilities that were harder to find in more crowded districts. You take a slow breath. The air still carries the city within it, but the intensity has softened. A cart rolls by, its movement smoother now, its wheels meeting less resistance from the ground. The man guiding it nods briefly as he passes you, a small gesture that feels more intentional than those you encountered earlier. You return the nod without thinking. Further ahead, a building stands with its door open, revealing a space that appears more organized. Shelves line the walls, items are arranged with care. A small business perhaps, modest but stable. You pause at the threshold. Inside, a man counts coins. His attention focused, his movements precise. He does not rush. There is a rhythm to his actions, but it is not driven by urgency. It is measured. You step back. The street continues. A thoughtful question appears often in historical reflection. What factors allowed some individuals or families to move beyond the most difficult conditions, while others remained within them? The answers are complex, involving work opportunity, timing, and sometimes chance. You begin to sense that complexity here. This place is not separate from where you started. It is connected, layered. You pass another doorway. Inside, a family sits together at a table sharing a simple meal. The light is steady. The space is still small, but it feels less compressed. Their voices carry a calm tone, not hushed, not strained. You move on. The street opens slightly more. The sky above becomes a little wider, the line of it less restricted by the buildings on either side. You notice the difference immediately, even if it is subtle. You take another breath. It feels easier again. You realize that leaving the worst conditions behind does not mean leaving hardship entirely. It means changing its shape, making it more manageable, more contained. You continue walking. The sounds of the denser district behind you fade, gradually replaced by a quieter pattern. Footsteps spaced further apart, voices that do not overlap as heavily, movement that feels less urgent. You glance back one more time. The transition is not marked by a clear line. It is gradual, almost invisible, but it is there. You turn forward again. The street ahead continues offering something different, though not entirely new. You understand now that for many this kind of shift is the goal. Not escape from the city, but movement within it. Step by step, block by block, you take another step. The path continues, carrying you further from the tightest spaces, but never fully removing you from the world you have walked through. And as you move forward, you begin to see that survival here is not only about enduring where you are, it's also about finding a way, however small, to move towards something better. You continue forward and the street begins to quiet in a deeper, more settled way, as if the city itself is easing into a slower rhythm. The movement around you thins, the voices soften, even the sounds of carts and footsteps feel more distant, less urgent. The sky above shifts. It is still dim, but there is a faint light beginning to gather at its edge, soft and gradual. Not yet strong enough to change the street, but enough to suggest that something is coming. Morning! You slow your pace. The buildings around you remain the same, worn and closed, yet they feel different under this early light. Edges that were hidden in shadow now begin to show. The lines of the walls, the shape of the windows, the quiet details that night concealed. A widely accepted observation in urban history is that the cycle of day and night in dense 19th century neighborhoods shaped not only activity but perception. Morning did not erase the difficulties of the previous day, but it changed how they were seen, how they were approached. You take a slow breath. The air feels slightly cooler, slightly clearer, though not entirely free of the weight you've come to recognize. It carries traces of everything that came before. Smoke, dampness, the faint memory of food, of movement, of life continuing. You walk on. A door opens nearby. A man steps out, stretching briefly before setting his shoulders and moving forward. His expression is neutral, his pace steady. There is no hesitation in his movement. The day has begun, and with it the task that cannot be delayed. You pass him. Door opens. Then another. The street begins to stir. A less frequently emphasized detail in personal accounts is that for many residents, morning brought not relief but repetition. The same routines resumed, the same challenges returned. Yet within that repetition there was also a sense of continuity, a structure that allowed life to move forward. You notice it now. A woman sweeping the front of her doorway, her movement slow but consistent. A child stepping out beside her, blinking slightly in the early light. A cart being prepared, its contents arranged with care before it begins its route. You continue walking. The sounds build gradually, not all at once, but step by step. Voices return first in low tones, then more clearly. Footsteps become more frequent. The street begins to fill again, though not yet with the full intensity you experienced before. You glance back. The path you have taken stretches behind you, though it feels less distinct now, softened by distance and time. The places you passed remain, but they blend together in memory, forming a continuous experience rather than separate moments. You turn forward again. A thoughtful question appears often in historical reflection. How did individuals maintain a sense of self within environments that demanded constant adaptation? The answer is not easily defined, but it can be felt in the small consistencies that persist despite change. You begin to see those consistencies now in the way people move, in the way they prepare, in the way they begin again. You take another step. The light grows slightly stronger, revealing more of the street, more of the faces, more of the details that night softened. It does not transform the environment, it simply makes it more visible. A curious note from some accounts suggests that observers who visited these neighborhoods often remarked on the resilience of their residents, though that word can feel too simple for what you have seen. It suggests strength without acknowledging the complexity behind it. You carry that thought with you. The street continues to fill. Movement returns to its steady rhythm. You walk among it, now no longer entirely separate from it, though still aware of your place within it. You take a slow breath. The air settles in your lungs with a familiarity that feels almost natural now. You realize that what you have experienced is not a single moment, not a single story. It is a cycle, repeated, layered, continuous. You continue walking. The street stretches ahead, carrying the day with it just as it carried the night. And as you move forward, you understand that survival here is not defined by a single act or a single decision. It is built from many small actions, repeated, adapted, sustained. You take one more step, then another. The light grows a little stronger. The sounds settle into their daytime pattern. The city continues, and slowly, gently, you allow yourself to step back from it, carrying the memory without the weight, letting the details soften at the edges. Your breathing slows, your pace eases. The street fades slightly, not disappearing but becoming more distant, more quiet in your mind. You remain still for a moment, just breathing, just resting. The sounds continue, but they no longer demand your attention. They exist around you, not within you. You take one last slow breath and let it go. Sweet dreams.